Hello everybody and welcome to the global launch of the 7th Smart Centres Index. I'd like to make an especial welcome to people who are watching live today. We're very conscious of the fact that these global reports are attracting an audience from all around the world, and some of you will be tuning in at what can only be described as antisocial hours. A special thank you to you. Some of you will be tuning in on the recording that will be posted within the next 2 or 3 days. And if you're in certain parts of the world, I don't blame you for waiting until then. But for everybody who is here, welcome. And for those of you who are joining live, you have the opportunity to chip in with questions through the GoToWebinar panel. We do ask you, if you are attending live, to put your questions to us that way through the questions box. If you don't do that, we will get the questions afterwards, because we are now locked in a bubble within GoToWebinar. But for everybody who's attending, including those who'll be watching the recording after time, we're always interested to hear from you. Your comments and questions, we would respond to them, even if they come in a few days' time. But this morning here in London, we hope to generate a little bit of discussion as well as hearing about the index. So next slide. My name's Ian Harris. I'm one of the founder directors of Zien Group. And it is an absolute pleasure and a privilege for me to host today's Distributed Futures session on the Smart Centres Index. Next slide, please. So just before I introduce Bekcan, I would like to say a few words about our sponsors, who are many and varied. They sponsor not only the Global Financial Centres Index, Smart Centres Index, and the like, but also the whole program of webinars that we here at Zien Group curate. And were it not for these wonderful sponsors, we would not be able to produce this work and host this webinar program. So big thanks to all of these organisations. If we can jump forward 2 slides, please, so I can introduce the sponsor of today's event, which is the Astana International Financial Centre, and we're very pleased to have with us today Bekcan Mutanov, who is the director of the Tech Hub at AIFC, and he is going to speak to you now just to introduce the event. Bekcan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. Thank you, Mike, for hosting me. And it's a big honor for me for giving a speech in front of you guys. And so, yeah, we can skip the first slide, and so we can start about the ecosystem. What do we have within the AFC? So I'm gonna give like 2 things. The first one is how we are developing the innovative things within the AFC, and very small talk about what's happening within the Astana city. So here you see so we can say that when we just started our journey in 2018, we have several kind of key pillars, and the fintech was one of the 5 key pillars, among the others, like asset management, Islamic finance, green finance, private banking, and the capital markets. So fintech, we started to develop in 2 trajectories. The first one is the regulatory framework, which is the basis, and I'm gonna talk about the second one a little bit later. So the first one, we started to work with the market at the business development pillar. So we've been focusing on the regulation, and we've been focusing on so first, what we wanted to develop was kind of like unclear at that time in 2017 and 2018 years. And there was a lot of like hype things related to fintech, and most of the people didn't understand what's happening in the world. And first, what we had to do is kind of like to provide some kind of like a basis. And we've been analyzing a lot about how the other international financial centers work, and what type of like projects have done in other jurisdictions, and what's the benchmark, so what we have to use and adopt and settle down, deploy in the Kazakhstan and within the AFC jurisdiction. So first we started to develop the competence center on financial technologies, and we launched that center of competence, which were dedicated to analyze and to conduct a lot of research what's happening in Kazakhstan, in region and around the world. And based on that, so we've been providing to the AFC leadership, to the Kazakhstani leadership, a lot of various types of recommendations, what have to be done by the governments, and we analyzed some kind of like a success formula, how we can achieve that goals, what we put in our journey in the end. So we found that we have to focus on 5 directions, and as well as this is one of the methodology of the international indices, several types of indices, and the Kazakhstan was kind of like ready to be a part of that type of like a competition and to compete with other financial centers. The first one, so it's a kind of like a government support, the first element, the first factor of that success formula, and so we decided that the regulation will be one of the parts, and so we decided to launch special regime where you can test and pilot other types of activities which is not regulated and which is not existed in Kazakhstani market at all. And the second one is related to infrastructure. So we divided into 2, which the first one is related to hard infrastructure, and the second one is the soft infrastructure. Regarding the soft infrastructure, so we decided to work on with the banks, with the other financial institutions and the non-financial institutions in terms of the making a convergency of different type of methodology and business models, and we call it as a corporate innovation program. So we launched the accelerator and the incubator for the corporates on deployment of different types of business models within that organizations, and we've been selling it within the Kazakhstan and in the region. The third one is the human capital, basically. So we've been attracting a lot of international expertise. We've been launching our advisory council on financial technologies. Later on, that was transformed to the kind of like a mentorship. So we've been calling and we've been conducting to that experts from around the world to learn what is happening and what are the insights in terms of the development of any kind of like innovative ecosystem. So they've been sharing that ideas and they've been helping us to bring that benchmarks to the AFC and to the Kazakhstan. And we became a part of different type of memberships and the various boards, where we also have been sharing our insights, our expertise, and our conclusions, what we've done regarding with working with the market. And we've done a wide range of, we brought the wide range of partners to Kazakhstan. So we integrated the AFC to the international network. The another one is so we've been working on the sources and mechanisms of venture financing. Basically, that's without any kind of like a money sources and the mechanisms. So you cannot develop any kind of innovative ecosystem, which it could be a fintech, govtech, or edtech, or some others. So we from our side, we basically build up the fundamental things which kind of like used for becoming not only for the fintech ecosystem, but for the technology one. So historically, we used our center of competence products, our analysis, etc., to build another one. So can you go to the next slide, please, Mike? Yeah. So this is the second part, which is basically related to the Fintech Lab, which is basically we're related to the providing regulatory flexibility for the market participants, the key players, to test and pilot all of their activities. And the AFC Fintech Lab is one of the active sandboxes in the world. So we have in a queue more than 300 companies who applied to our sandbox regime, and we have approved 50 companies, and basically half of them are now active. So for example, I can give some numbers. Around like 5 crowdfunding companies are now active in the AFC, and about 15 licenses were provided to the AFC participants, to the companies, and that they are working in virtual asset service providers activity. And that's the among the CIS countries, it's only sandbox regime which is the most active comparing to our neighbor countries. So next slide, please. Yeah, basically, so we've been using our platform, so AFC as a jurisdiction, as a ecosystem, as a platform, as a so-called club. So we decided to go into more wider pillars, not focusing only in fintech, but in a technology sector. So we've launched together with our government of Republic of Kazakhstan and the World Economic Forum, based on the AFC. So we've launched in 2021 the Affiliated Center for Fourth Industrial Revolution. And so you can see the main directions in which we are working now. So Internet of Things. So we now piloting with energy sector, policy and data management. So we helped our government to develop the data policy, and so hopefully our government will adopt all that recommendations what our team done within the affiliated center. And then now we are working in a like directional regulatory sandbox where different type of players, where different type of industries who can test and pilot and to go live within the AFC's regulatory framework and within the AFC jurisdiction, and to bring the new business models to the Kazakhstani ecosystem. So one of the projects what we are doing within the C4IR, the Siri project, which is basically we are partnering with the INSEAD, which is the Singapore-based organization, and that they are helping us to determine the level of technology readiness and adoption among the industrial enterprises for providing them the tools and the instruments to implement some innovational technologies and to deploy it within the different type of organizations. Yeah, so we can go to the next slide. Basically, so this is related for in the VC hub. So we call it the VC hub. So this is the only jurisdiction within the CIS countries where you can structure the deals, where you can structure the companies, startups within the AFC jurisdiction with the canons of the international jurisdiction. So we make it more easier to join the startups ecosystem. So now within the AFC, among the 1,900 companies, 400 companies are IT, tech and innovation and fintech related companies. And most of them, like as you can see, 115 projects are registered within the AFC, and that they're structuring their deals and that they're using the convertible loan, keys, safe care mechanisms for structuring their collaboration with the VC funds. And so for the VC funds, there is a kind of tax regime special where they're not paying taxes, any kind of, and that's for the investors part, and for the startups part. So in more detail, so you can go to these two VC guides, what we've prepared for the market. One is for especially for the founders, for the startup side, and the second one is for the investors part. So basically in Astana, we have different type of organizations, which is actively working in the development of tech, innovation, ecosystem development, and our partners in it is the Ministry of Digital Development, and their subsidiary organization is Astana Hub, which is basically supporting the ecosystem from the so-called kids from the school and with the big companies, and they also have almost like 2,000 companies in their so-called special economic zone, and they provide the tax regime and the combination of, for example, if one startup would like to grow, so we are providing from our side the jurisdictional preferences, and that they are providing the tax preferences, and that combination is one of the active mechanisms to enter to Kazakhstani markets. And so we are supporting from our side to help the investors, to help the startups to feel safe, because we have our court and the International Arbitration Center, and we are providing a special kind of like a regime for the expats to feel free and safe, and to get any kind of like a governmental services in one-stop shop principle in the AFC's expat center. I see that Jan is saying me that I'm running out of time. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to share.
Bekjan, thank you very much. We will take the questions at the end, and I think there will be some questions that will probably be actually for both of you. But at this stage, let me just say thank you, Bekjan, for warming us up. And now I'm going to hand over to Mike, who will present the findings of the Smart Centers Index number 7.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Bekjan, for that. Thank you, Ian, for that introduction. As you probably know, I'm Mike Wardle, Chief Executive Officer for the ZN Group. And one of the things I do as part of my role is to work on the indices we publish on financial and commercial centers across the world. For those of you who are not familiar with that research, the 3 research series that we run include the Global Financial Centers Index and the Global Green Finance Index, as well as the focus of today's topic, the Smart Centers Index. And the Smart Centers Index is designed to track financial and commercial centers' ability to create, develop, and deploy technology. The aim of this is to help both centers understand where they sit in relation to some of their colleague centers, but also aiming to help investors, governments, and regulators take a view about the attractiveness of centers for new technologies and products by just having an overview of how attuned those centers are to attracting innovation and growth in technology. The index is a factor assessment index, which combines 2 sets of data. First of all, perception data, which we gather using the Smart Centers Index survey. This asks practitioners throughout the world their views about particular centers and 3 different dimensions, which I'll come on to in a minute. So that's one set of data taken from our survey. The second set of data is 136 different quantitative measures, which are indices drawn from a wide range of sources that relate to centers. And these cover a range of different data points around different aspects of a center's development. And we use machine learning to combine those 2 data sets to give an overall index rating. I mentioned that we ask in our survey for the assessment of 3 different dimensions, which we weight equally in calculating the index. The first of these is innovation support, including regulation and the support provided for the innovation and technology industry by the ecosystem. Secondly, the creative intensity, if you like, the depth of the embedding of technology and innovative industries in the economy of that particular center. And finally, delivery capability, which is around the quality of the work that's being undertaken in that particular center. In terms of the development of the centers in the index, we're now tracking 77 centers in SCI 7, and you can see on the map here where they're located. So a concentration on North America, Western Europe, and Southeast Asia, with a cluster also now in the Middle East. And in terms of headline performance, Western European and US centers continue to show strong performance. Asia Pacific centres in this edition have fallen back just a little. London took first place in the index, and London and New York have been both at the top of the index, or second, since the first edition of SCI 7. And New York indeed still takes second place, with San Francisco in third. Overall, there's 4 Western European cities featuring in the top 10, 3 from the US, with Singapore and Hong Kong featuring in the top 10 as well from Asia Pacific. And Tel Aviv has entered the top 10 for the first time in this edition of the index. I think displaying the concentration, I think, of technology business in Israel. 5 centres rose 10 or more places in the rankings, while 6 fell 10 or more places, which tells you there's a reasonable stability in the rankings in the index. It's not a large number of centres moving vast ranking places up and down. But really significantly, following a fall in the average ratings across all centres in the Smart Centres Index 6, the average rating in SCI 7 rose by 6.28%, and every centre rose in the ratings. We think what this shows is increased confidence at present in the quality and depth of technology and innovation across the world. So there's still differences between centres, but overall there's confidence in the technology sector. Just a brief word on who gets involved in the SCI survey, just on our respondents. So you'll see we get around a third of our respondents come from Western Europe, just under a third from Asia Pacific, a number from North America, and then some from other regions of the world as well. And by sector, you'll see that we cover a fair amount of sectors, 24% working directly in technology, people working in professional services, often supporting companies working in technology, people working in policy and public finance, and the knowledge sector, including the university sector, and then a range of people working mostly in finance, supporting technology development. I mentioned London and New York taking first and second place, but looking at the top 20 centres rather than just the top 10, I think it is interesting just to note that we've got a number of other Western European and American centres, US centres, also in the top 20. Malta comes into the top 20, although it has dropped a few ranking places since the last edition of the index. Vancouver has moved up considerably in this edition of the index. And finally, Busan comes into the top 20 for the first time. And looking at the ratings over time for the leading centres in the index, the top 5, you'll see there's a reasonably consistent pattern over the editions of the index. But we just see San Francisco moving up faster in this edition to take third place, but with Swiss centres closing in and quite close behind. And taking the 3 dimensions I mentioned, innovation, support, creative intensity, and delivery capability, we'll just see that there are some differences in the strengths of individual cities. So, I mean, they're quite slight differences, but Chicago and San Francisco do less well on innovation support than do London and New York. And that's the area, remember, around regulation and ecosystem support for the development of technology. Moving on to the regional analysis, in Western Europe, 10 centres in the region maintained or improved their position. Just noting that Dublin, Frankfurt, Milan and Madrid all fell 10 rank places in SCI 7. But I always, when I'm talking about our indices, so the important thing is trend rather than a single snapshot. So we'll be looking, as we always do, for what the trend over time will be when we see the next edition of the index. Turn to North America. There's now 9 North American centres featuring an SCI 7, 3 of those in the world top 10, with San Francisco moving up into third place, as I've mentioned. 5 centres in the region maintained or improved their rank position, and I mentioned before, Vancouver has done very well. It's improved 12 rank places, and so we'll be talking to people in Canada as to what they think may be happening over on the West Coast. Turn to Asia Pacific. Hong Kong, Singapore and Busan rank in the top 20 in the world, and the 8 centres in the region rose in the rankings in this edition. with Taipei improving more than 10 places, actually more than 20 places, and again an interesting outcome. And we do, as I mentioned, overall Asia Pacific centres have maybe fallen back a little in the rankings, and it still is interesting to us that with the amount of technological development and innovation in China, Chinese centres are not yet performing as well as you might expect them to in the SCI. Turning to Eastern Europe and Central Asia, Sofia maintained its status as the leading centre in the region, but lost a little ground. Tallinn entered the index for the first time in 44th position. Astana, who entered the index in SCI 6, moved up 11 ranked places in its second entry in the Smart Centres Index. And Berkjan, just wanted to highlight that, given your involvement today. In the Middle East and Africa, Tel Aviv leads the region, Dubai takes second place, and just noting Doha, who entered the index for the first time in 29th position. And other than Johannesburg, all other centres in the region improved their ranking places, with Riyadh and Bahrain improving 10 or more places in the ranking. So quite a strong performance in this edition in the Middle East and Africa. Latin America and Caribbean, we're tracking 3 centres, all of which fell a bit in the ratings, in the rankings, and just noting that they're quite closely matched, with Mexico City just 4 places ahead of the Cayman Islands and Cayman only 3 ahead of Trinidad and Tobago. I mentioned earlier on that the quantitative measures that we use in compiling the index are divided into different areas. These include technology factors, financial services, reputational, business environment, human capital, and infrastructure. And we are able to run the index model using just the factors which fall in those clusters, those areas. And when we do that, we get a slightly different ranking in the index. So to give a few examples, you'll see that London and New York are strong across the board, taking first or second place across every element. Singapore is very strong on most elements, drops a bit on reputational and general, where it only scores in 7th place. I'll come on to the technology factors in particular in just a moment, but I think here we can see some of the strengths and weaknesses of centres. So Vancouver does very well in terms of human capital. Hong Kong does well in business environment, say. And so this is a way in which we can help people understand how centres compare across a whole range of their strengths and weaknesses. I mentioned I come on to technology because this compares the placings in the index overall, the all factors column, with the placings just using the technology data points. We'll see here that New York and London still take first and second place, although New York on technology comes just above London. Singapore comes up a few places when we just look at technology factors, San Francisco down, but there's some really big winners. Places like Washington, Chicago, Amsterdam, Luxembourg, up multiple places just looking at their technology offerings. So if I were an investor really focused on places where they're serious about technology, I'd be looking at this sub-index as well as the main Smart Centres Index in itself. We can track the effect of reputation advantage in the index by looking at the weighted average assessment that comes directly out of the survey that we run and comparing that with the overall SCI rating. We'll see that a number of cities have a positive reputation advantage. This means that they are marketing themselves well. People have a very good understanding of what's going on and rate them probably higher than would be justified if we just looked at the underlying quantitative data. At the other end of the scale, there's a number of cities with negative reputational advantage. This means that they are, we think, doing better than those people who are rating them understand. Their job is to be selling their services and their advantages rather better than they are at the moment, and making sure that the word gets out successfully. With that, I'm going to close and hand over to my colleague Ian Harris for some further observations on the data. Thank you.
Mike, thanks very much. Maybe have the next slide, please. These observations I'll go through briefly before we move on to the questions, because I think Mike has covered an awful lot of the things that I would say observationally. I would just like to talk about some regional differences in the assessments. In particular, these two charts show the average assessments given to New York and San Francisco by people in different regions of the world. Now, the people in Western Europe make up 43% of the contributors to the SCI at the moment, and you can see that they rate both New York and San Francisco on average lower than people in other parts of the world. Eastern Europe and Central Asia, in the case of New York, also ranking them lower, but people in Asia Pacific and in North America and in Latin America and the Caribbean rate New York and San Francisco significantly higher. So there definitely seems to be some regional variation in terms of the opinion about the progress that various centres are making, and that's, I think, a noteworthy point for people from those centres and for people who are actually trying to do interesting things in smart centres. May I have the next slide, please? I want to talk a little bit about the R-squared coefficient between various instrumental factors and the index as a whole. My first observation about R-squared in an environment like the Smart Centres Index is that the R-squared coefficient is fairly low across the board. So in other fields where I'm looking at R-squared, I'm looking for 0.95, 0.9 to prove a very, very strong goodness of fit. But when we're looking at our indices and all of the different factors that go into the index and all of the opinions from the people who contribute to the survey, we don't tend to be looking at high R-squared coefficients. So it's a comparative thing between the R-squared coefficients to look for the goodness of fit. And perhaps it's unsurprising for the Smart Centres Index that things like Fintech activity rate the highest, but also the comparison between the Global Financial Centres Index and the Smart Centres Index results. But interestingly, things like Urban Mobility and Readiness Index, which is one of the instrumental factors, shows relatively highly on this index as a goodness of fit with the results that come out of the SCI. So this list is the things that track the SCI pretty well. If we can move on to the next slide. This is looking at the same cut on technology factors, and this is strange and interesting. So again, Fintech activity ranking with those technology factors with a fairly good fit. Telecoms infrastructure is a fairly good fit, as are smart cities. But if you look at things like cybersecurity and some of the infrastructure things like broadband speed, and even things like the Global Fintech Index, it does not track very closely. So my job is to think, why might that be? And I think one of the main reasons that is the case is the amount of opinion that goes into the surveys and how fast this area is changing. So I think opinions in some parts of the world differ from opinions in other parts of the world, and I have a feeling that if we could do a snapshot today and get everybody to contribute their opinions today rather than over the last few months, some of these factors might look quite different now, because opinion is changing very, very rapidly in this field. And of course, different centres are developing at a rapid pace. So it's not just about opinion, it's about the truth of what is going on in some of the centres, and it's changing so rapidly. It's difficult to track, but that also makes it very interesting to look at those trends. And I would like to just hark back to Mike's point, where he said that he likes to look at the trends on these indices, not just at the what is your score this time around, because actually when we track those trends over a period of time, that is when you start to see I think some insight into really what is going on. The other thing that I think this tells us, and it came out of Mike's observations as well, is it's not just about the technology factors. There's a lot more to people's rating of a smart centre than just the technology factors. It's about all those things about, is this a place where people want to work? Do we get the know-how to come to this centre and actually get things done? Well, one more slide, I think, and then I'm going to move on to questions. We asked a special question about the space of technological change. We've asked this a couple of times: how quickly will quantum computers be able to break public key encryption? And thinking seems to have moved on this now. Last time we asked this question, which was 6 months ago, about 2/3 of the contributors said they thought that it would be broken within 5 years. Now it's more than 3/4. It's getting close to 80% of people reckon that quantum computers will be able to break public key encryption. So although the cybersecurity instrumental factors don't rate very highly here, people nevertheless think that every centre is going to have to do something about public key encryption in a bit of a hurry. That's all that I want to say before we move on to the question. So if we can just move on one more slide, please, which is, I think, taking us to yes, questions. And here we are. I've got one or two quite open questions and one or two sort of fairly closed questions that come in. I'd like to start with one of the closed ones, which I'm hoping that Mike can cover quite easily. Where the questioner is interested to see the Swiss and the Scandinavian centres doing particularly well. What do you think are the drivers of that? You did mention that you thought the Scandinavian centres are particularly good at promoting themselves. Is there more to it than that, Mike?
There is, but both in Switzerland and in Scandinavia, we sort of see particular strengths. And looking at the individual dimensions, the innovation, support, delivery, capability, and intensity, Swiss centres score particularly highly on innovation support. The quality of their regulation of technology is seen as very good. They're active in putting new regulation in place in terms of crypto assets, and are perceived as thinking really quite deeply about how to regulate technology. For Scandinavian centres such as Stockholm, Copenhagen, their strengths are different. Their delivery capability, the quality of what they do, is seen as stronger than in other centres. So we can track, in particular in those areas, Switzerland and Scandinavia, different strengths really coming through in the index results.
Thank you. I've got an open question here. We've had several questions along these lines. I will try to group it as one thing, and I think this would be really interesting if we get Bekcan and Mike to answer in their own ways. Maybe Bekcan would like to go first, and I'll encapsulate it in a very open question, which is, what are the most interesting developments in technology that you think are going to drive this index, in the future over the next few years?
Yeah, basically this is what is our strong side is related to financial technologies, and so what we've developed within the AFC, the sandbox regime, and so we are now accepting a lot of companies who are running their business related to digital assets and the crypto. So now that's one of the active, let's say, active industry, and so. As you know, in the previous 2 years, Kazakhstan became #2 in terms of the mining, and so that the mining of the cryptocurrency, and so that was kind of like a Kazakhstan brought to the leading points, and so we have a lot of mining companies who have liquidity, and so that's the first thing, which is related to the crypto and the digital assets industry. The second one is to our national bank, which is basically also located now in Astana and the AFC. So we are working on the development of the Web3 and the blockchain related projects. And basically that could be two main priority areas where Kazakhstan or Astana could focus. And the third one is related to AI. So now Kazakhstani organizations are running into this direction, and so they would like to run the different type of projects where Astana or Kazakhstan can contribute into this industry. The first one is Kazakhstan is also becoming one of the leading countries in this region in terms of the creative economy and some elements and technologies which is related to the development of the creative industry. So that's also could be one of the key pillars where we have to focus.
Thank you. Mike, would you like to add some observations on this?
Yeah, I think for me, so many in the audience will know that I also run the Global Green Finance Index, and I have a great interest in sustainability. And for me, the kind of most important technology is going to be developments that enable sustainability, whether that's using space observation and AI to monitor changes of biodiversity, the development of clean fuels, including green hydrogen, improved battery technology to work alongside renewable energy. So I think the innovative technology kind of needs a purpose, and addressing the global challenge of climate change, I think, and biodiversity loss should be high at the priority list. So I think technologies that are focused on sustainability are, for me, ones that are going to be very important over the next period.
Thank you. We have a late, short, direct question. Again, this one may be for you, Mike, from Yevgeny. Thank you very much. Yevgeny, could you please tell us a couple more words about Milan, Italy, and Southern Europe in general, how you see their place here?
Yeah, so far, we're not seeing a lot of response in our SCI survey relating to centres in Southern Europe. So in some of the other indices that we run, we are tracking more cities across the south of Europe. So at the moment, it seems that although I certainly know that very good things are going on in centres such as Milan, there doesn't seem to be a great deal of knowledge about what is going on or excitement generated amongst the international audience there. So at the moment, centres, for example, Madrid dropped 10 places in this edition of the index. Centres are struggling maybe to find their strength in the index, and at the moment I'm not sure whether that is to do with the underlying strength of the technology sector in those fields, or whether it is to do with the fact that they're not yet perceived by the wider audience as having that commitment to technology development. So at the moment the jury's out on where exactly that part of the world is sitting.
Okay, I've got one or two more open questions about large language models and unstructured learning, which I will cover in my wrap up, because if we really started talking about that, we would certainly run out of time. We have more or less run out of time. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. I think there should be a thank you slide. Yes, so really I just want to do some thank yous and wrap up. I think this is a really, really exciting area, and it's exciting because of the emergence of technologies like large language models and unstructured machine learning, which has been around for a long time, but it just bursts into the public awareness, and I think will affect opinion on what it means to be a smart centre, and what smart fintech really means, and all of those things over the next 6 months to a year. I think the reality is that there's been an enormous amount of work going on in this area for some time, but we're just starting to see it, and it's just starting to hit the general public, and that has an enormous impact. So this is a very fast-changing area, a very exciting one, and one where I suspect we're going to be asked to do a lot more research, and where maybe we will be doing some special topics within the Smart Centres Index around around that area. But it is for me to do the thank yous. Thank you again to the audience for your attention and for joining us today. A very special thank you to Bekjan Mutanov for joining us and giving us some insight into what's going on in the Astana International Financial Centre, and also your insights into some of the specific technologies that really seem to matter in this area. That's been extremely interesting and helpful. Thanks also, of course, to you, Mike. Thanks again to our sponsors, without which none of this would be possible. I would also like to draw your attention, if you think that May is almost over just because we've got a bank holiday weekend coming up in the UK, you're quite wrong. We have got 3 more events going on before May is out: closing the savings gap on Tuesday, digital innovation in financial services on Wednesday afternoon. And if that's not enough for you, an Intelligence Forums roundtable on Wednesday. There are links on the slides and on our website, so you can look at all of the different things that we're up to. I would like to leave you with a couple of quotes. I thought I would ask ChatGPT to help me to provide some really meaningful quotes to end our day. I have to say I had to give it three chances at doing this. I didn't like its first couple of goes at this, but then it really hit pay dirt. So there's one from Heraclitus from about 2,500 years ago, who says, "The only constant in life is change," which I think is very pertinent to what we're doing with smart centers. And then a slightly more recent one from a management thinker that I've always liked, Peter Drucker, who says, "The best way to predict the future is to create it." And I think we as a group of people, the audience who take the time to listen to this sort of thing, and the sort of work that is going on in all of these smart centers, we are trying to create the future that maybe we're also trying to predict. So once again, thanks to everybody. It's been such a pleasure to host this webinar, and I look forward to seeing many of you again very soon. Goodbye.
Thank you.